Hi everyone, Mr. Hawkins with Hawkins Tech, and today Apple released iPadOS 26.2 to the public. Now, the file size was 1.36 gigabytes, and that was coming from the RC on my iPad Air 4th generation, simply because the RC2 was not available on the iPad. Now, this update was released alongside iPadOS or iOS 26.2, which I already made a video on, macOS 26.2, tvOS, and HomePodOS 26.2, and also iPadOS 18.7.3, which I'm going to have to do a video on, and I might do that today or tomorrow. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the build number and talk about what's new. So if I go into settings, about an iOS version, as you can see here, the build number is 23C55. That is the build number for iPadOS 26.2. Now the first new feature in iPadOS 26.2, if I pull it down on the lock screen, and if I go into my fonts here to customize the clock, for one, I'm going to have to pull it slightly down. We now have a slider to adjust liquid glass. If I put it all the way to the right, you can see but the glass is transparent, or rather it's more frosted. However, if I put it to the left, the liquid glass is somewhat very clear. You can now adjust the clock with liquid glass sort of font. Having it all the way to the right, more easier to see, more frosted. But having it all the way to the left, more transparent, more harder to see. But I typically would keep it right about here, so I can have a little bit of both. Now, there is a major new feature with multitasking. If I go into Safari here, and you can see already that Safari is in split view. Now, if I just drag it over slightly, and then I'm going to open up Mail, you can see we now have split view, split screen, and slide over. One thing about it though is every time I drag a window either too far to the left or too far to the right, it would force the window in full screen, giving me this big gap right here. So if I'm in the middle, I avoid the gap. But if I go to the too far to the right or too far to the left, then the gap will happen. But if you're in the middle, you shouldn't really worry much about the gap. But you now have split view and slide over. So I can bring another window over, like, for example, calendars. And I can bring over photos. Not only that, but we also can drag and drop windows as well. Well, you see that I tried to put in 5 apps, so Twitter wouldn't let me go into that, because as I tried to bring in Twitter, you can see that Safari is dimmed in the background. That is where the limitation on my 2020 iPad Air will begin, because this iPad Air has 4 gigabytes of RAM. Though if you have the M5 iPad Pro or any of the iPad Pros with the A12X chip or newer, you will have, or the iPad Pro M1 or newer, you will have the full 8 gigs of RAM. The iPad Pro with the A12X and Z chip and the iPad Air, this one being the 4th gen, does not have enough RAM to run all 8 apps at once. So that is a really nice change in iPadOS 26. Now, if I go into reminders and I go to a reminder that I created on my iPhone, you can see we now have urgent reminders. So within the reminders app, you will now have urgent reminders. This is a new feature in iPadOS 26.2. And it's also in iOS 26.2 as well. If I go within settings and I go into AirDrop, you see we have a new feature called Manage Known AirDrop Contacts. Not only that, but you can now AirDrop to Google Pixel devices. So let me AirDrop something to the iPhone here. I'm going to take a screenshot, as I'm just going to show you how this works here. As I'm just going to AirDrop something to the iPad here. As you can see, I just AirDropped that screenshot to the iPad. Now, Google Pixel is now able to AirDrop iPhone with Google's Quick Share feature. Unfortunately, though, it is not available on the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G. I really wish it was, but unfortunately, it is not. Now, another feature we have in iPadOS 26.2 is a feature in Apple Podcast. And as you see, we have a splash screen. But if I go into Apple Podcast here, we now have chapters in Apple Podcast. So if I want to click on the chapter that talks about the M5 Apple Vision Pro here,
about the iPad, and it was frankly yet again personal.
I clicked on the chapter that talked about the Apple Vision Pro. I really like the fact that you now have chapters within Apple Podcasts. I really hope they add that to Spotify, where I upload my podcast, and I know I haven't uploaded one in quite a while. As far as my performance on iPadOS 26.2, well, since I updated from the RC, well, first of all, let's talk about that bug that I talked about a couple days ago in the YouTube short that I uploaded. Essentially, when you drag an app around or a widget and you go into the Pages dots, the iPad would respring. Fortunately, Apple fixed the bug in iPadOS 26.2, the public version. And there was one more feature that I forgot to mention with focus modes. And the sleep focus now has a purple icon. But I created a new focus. As you can see here, this is the new focus that I created. If I press and hold on the pages here, and I go into it, we now have options. And what this will do is you can customize different things for your focus modes. So that is a really nice feature. Now, as far as my overall performance, well, performance is pretty good. There is no lag or no choppiness. Sometimes with the iPhone, it will get choppy and the performance will throttle on older iPhones. When the iPhone gets too warm, the processor will throttle. And that's why when I screen record, because it has overheated when I screen recorded and throttled the processor. That is an unfortunate caveat with older iPhones, something that having an older iPhone you just have to deal with as a content creator. But performance is pretty great with this device. As you can see, I'm scrolling in the app library, and performance is pretty good. Now, there isn't any new notes in the feedback app, obviously, because this is the public stable release and not the beta. But as far as what to expect next from Apple, well, if I go into my calendar rather, wherever I have it here, the next thing I would expect at this point is iPadOS 26 or iPadOS 26.3 Developer Beta 1. Now, I forgot to do this at the start of the video, but I'm going to turn off my beta updates so that my iPad doesn't try installing iPadOS 26.3 Developer Beta 1. I would expect that to be released on December 15th. After that, I would expect nothing else from this year. However, in 2026, I would expect iPadOS 26.3 Beta 2, and that's to release the week of January 5th. Then we get Beta 3 the week of January 12th, an RC, which I will be installing the week of December 19th, or January 19th, rather, and a final release the week of January 26th. Then we get iPadOS 26.4, and then we will get iPadOS 27. Now, as I mentioned in my iPhone video, I believe Apple could drop some iPhones from the list and iPads. The iPhones are the iPhone 11, iPhone 11 Pro, iPhone 11 Pro Max, 2020 iPhone SE second generation, and the some iPad models will be dropped. iPad Pro 11-inch and 12.9-inch 2018, iPad Pro 11-inch and 12.9-inch 2020, iPad Mini 5th generation, as well as potentially the iPad 8th generation. Though I don't think Apple will drop support for the iPad 8th generation, and it's a good possibility that the 2020, or maybe not the 2020 iPad Pro 11 and 12.9-inch A12Z chip models. However, it's a good possibility that the iPad 8th generation, released in September 2020, could still get iOS 27. And the reason why I say that is because that device is as new as the iPhone 12 and iPad Air 4th generation, while the iPad 8th generation has the A12 chip, and the iPhone 12 and iPad Air has the A14 chip. They both were released in late 2020 versus early 2020, putting the iPad Pro 11-inch and 12.9-inch A12Z chip models, putting them on the same spectrum as the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max, SE2, iPad Mini 5, and the 2018 iPad Pros. But again, these are all speculations. I don't know 100% what devices Apple could keep and could drop from the release of iOS 27. We will just have to wait till June to find that out at WWDC. But right now, that is my prediction on how many devices Apple could drop. As far as anything else with this update, well, that's really it for iPadOS 26.2. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Mr. Hawkins with Hawkins Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.